This is a video about the characters in chapter 2 of Mice and Men by John Steinbeck. And this is the first chapter that takes place in the bunkhouse, which is the microcosm for Depression-era America. And it's a chapter in which we're introduced to all of the other main characters in the novel, apart from George and Lennie, who we'd already met in chapter 1. In this video, first of all, I'm going to explain to you how Steinbeck brilliantly sets the stage for the introduction of all these characters. Then we're going to talk about George again. We're going to talk about Lennie again. We're going to talk about George and Lennie's relationship. That continues to be important. And then we're going to talk about the characters one by one as they're introduced. We've got Candy first, then we've got Curley, then we've got Curley's wife, then we've got the final major character, Slim. And we'll talk a little bit about Carlson as well. Steinbeck is setting this up like a tragedy. And rather like a tragedy, a classical tragedy, Steinbeck goes for this concept of unity of place. Most of the rest of the novel takes place in and around the bunkhouse, this one location. And in classical tragedy, there was a real focus on having one location. Why? Well, it helps to build this sense of entrapment that the characters can't get out of this place and that the tension builds as they're there. And Steinbeck really does that well in this novel. And what I really love about Steinbeck's sort of staging of the action, if you like, is the way he uses the door of the bunkhouse as if it was the stage curtain. And we'll see in this video, and as you read the novel, how characters' appearance at the door is like the appearance of a character for the first time on the stage. So just watch for the way that Steinbeck uses the door in a dramatic way for entrances and exits. It's an absolutely brilliant touch of his. So this is now the first time that we see George in a social environment. George and Lennie sitting by the bank of the river, their companionship was kind of them in private, wasn't it? But here is George in public. How's he going to behave? He lies quite a bit, doesn't he? When he meets the boss and the boss gets angry with him and says, you know, why weren't you here to buck barley this morning? George explains, oh, the bus driver left us 10 miles away. That's dramatic irony because the reader knows that the bus driver only left them 4 miles away. But he also lies again when he says that Lennie was kicked in the head by a horse, and he lies again when he says Lennie is his cousin, and he lies again about why they left Weed, saying it was just because the job was done. Some of these the readers already knew were lies. Some of them we find out were lies as soon as the boss has left the room. We're kind of listening in as Candy listens in while George and Lennie talk about it. And he's like, I wasn't kicked in the head by no horse. So it's fascinating that he's lying. Why is he lying? Well, perhaps it's to do with this fear that Slim was talking about. If you want to know more about that, then watch this video, which was on the themes in chapter 2. But despite all these lies to the boss, we see that George is capable of fellow feeling and of starting to build a relationship. And this happens with Candy. When George hears Candy or finds Candy listening in at them, he starts to get angry and Candy becomes all defensive, and it says he was reassured by the Swamper's defense. Come on in and sit down a minute, he said. That's a hell of an old dog. So George invites Candy over and he praises Candy's dog. Other characters will not praise Candy's dog, but George does. So there's something kind-hearted about George there. And of course, building and maintaining the friendship with Lennie is something that was kind of a positive quality of George's that we've already seen in chapter 1. So when we see it repeated with Candy in chapter 2, we recognise in George, despite his anger and his lying, that actually there's goodness in there. What about Lennie? Well, just like George, this is the first time we see Lennie in a social situation. But completely unlike George, Lennie is incapable of managing the social situation. So he's been prepped by George to keep completely quiet during the interview so that he doesn't give away his mental challenges. But he's just not able to do it. When George says to the boss he's as strong as a bull, Lennie repeats to himself proudly, strong as a bull. So he completely forgets this social situation he's in where he's supposed to be being quiet so that they can get work. And he repeats what George has said. Oh dear, Lennie. And then when Curley's wife comes in, again, he's completely unable to deal with her flirtations. His body responds to her without him being able to do anything about it. Lennie's eyes move down over her body. There we go. His eyes are acting independently of his brain in an animalistic way. So yeah, Lennie in social situations, he can't keep his mouth shut with the boss. He can't stop himself from looking at Curley's wife. We can see that he can't really manage social situations. It's interesting here that again we see their relationship not in private but in public. And we see that the people looking at them and getting to know them for the first time just can't really understand their relationship. The boss is very suspicious of George, thinks George must be using Lennie. Say, what you selling? I said, what stake you got in this guy? You taking his pay away from him? I never seen one guy take so much trouble for another guy. We see that it's really unusual for migrant workers to look after each other, and the boss just doesn't really get it. And Curley views them as having a strange relationship, but actually implies that their relationship might be homosexual. Curley lashed his body around. By Christ, he's got to talk when he spoke to. What the hell are you getting into it for? We travel together, said George coldly. Oh, so it's that way. George was tense and motionless. Yeah, it's that way. Okay, the strong implication from Curley there, oh, so it's that way, is that these are two men travelling together because they are in a homosexual relationship. You've got the boss, you've got Curley. They just can't understand two men travelling around together. And that goes to show, once again, how unusual it is for two men to have a companionship during the Depression. Candy's an interesting character. We talked about him in the themes chapter as someone who's marginalised because he's not an able-bodied man. He's physically disabled and he's mopping out the bunkhouse. He's been left behind. He's in a domestic setting. He is emasculated. He's not out there bucking barley. And in an emasculated way, what does he do? He likes to listen behind doors and he likes to gossip. For the reader, he's a character who really tells us what the general opinion of other characters is. So Curley comes in and then Candy starts saying, yeah, he's pretty handy. And Curley's wife, Candy comments on her, she's a tart. So Candy is really giving us the lowdown on what these characters are like. So he serves that dramatic function as well. He is someone who the reader can turn to see what public opinion is of different characters. And then we can compare Candy's opinion with our own opinion of what the characters are like when they are on the stage. He's also got a dog who is really like an extension of himself, isn't he? At his heels there walked a drag-footed sheepdog, grey of muzzle and with pale blind old eyes. The dog struggled lamely to the side of the room and lay down, grunting softly to himself and licking his grizzled, moth-eaten coat. A disabled old man, a lame old dog. The parallel is striking, again suggesting that there's little difference between animals and humans, between mice and men in this Darwinian novel. Speaking of Darwinian worlds, let's look at Curley. He really represents the angry, aggressive male, animal-like in his behaviour. He walks in, the first thing we notice is the way that he's trying to set himself apart from the other men by wearing his boots like his father. Then we notice that he behaves in a very instinctive way when he looks at Lennie. He's a small man, is Curley, and he's threatened by this giant man, Lennie. And look what happens. His eyes passed over the new men and he stopped. He glanced coldly at George and then at Lennie. His arms gradually bent at the elbows and his hands closed into fists. He stiffened and went into a slight crouch. His glance was at once calculating and pugnacious. He doesn't use his brain. His arms bent at the elbows, his hands closed into fists. His body parts are doing the performance for him. There's no brain engaged, there's no brain involved. So it's all instinctive, it's all animal-like. He crouches. It looks like he's an animal getting ready to pounce, doesn't it? His glance, pugnacious, that means looking for a fight. So he really represents in this Darwinian world an animal looking for a fight. And he comes back in a couple of times later in the chapter, and again he's looking for his wife, but he's coming into the bunkhouse to look for his wife. What's he doing that for? He's looking for her. He's looking for something to be aggressive about. The way he moves around so quickly, yo-yoing around between place and place, suggests this animal-like activity as well. And the last verb used to describe him is jerked. Jerk, what a violent, non-fluid kind of action. So he's an aggressive man. Candy, our resident gossip-in-chief, describes him as pretty handy. He done quite a bit in the ring. He's a lightweight and he's handy. Quite a bit in the ring. He's a boxer. So this is a physically aggressive man. Let's talk about Curley's wife. In fact, that's exactly what happens in the novel. We hear talk about Curley's wife before we even meet her. Candy gossips about her before we know who she is. And he describes her as a tart, a woman who sleeps around, in really negative language. That's fascinating, isn't it? Look at the structural things Steinbeck has done there. The boss, we meet him, and then we hear about him after from Candy the gossip. Oh, the boss is all right, he says. Curley, we meet him, and then Candy says, Candy, he's a lightweight, he's a fighter, he's a boxer. But Curley's wife, we don't even meet her. And we're already being told by Candy the gossip what to think about her. That's structurally fascinating. It shows her low position in the hierarchy, that she is defined before we get to meet her. And there's also something about gender here, isn't there? I mean, there's no problem with the men going off into town to raise hell at Christmas, which presumably implies that they're going to get drunk and visit prostitutes. That's seen as absolutely fine. But for a woman to be described as a tart, as in someone who likes to flirt with men or perhaps have sexual relations with men, that's really looked down upon. And this starts to get us into this idea of the low social standing of women in this environment, even before we've met the woman herself. And this is an idea that goes on throughout the novel. Curley's wife represents women, and she doesn't have much of a role to play among the men. She's kind of desperately looking for a role, but they just put her down all the time. I mean, look at what she's called, Curley's wife. She doesn't even get her own name. And that happens throughout the whole novel. We never find out her name. She's just a possession, the possessive S of Curley's. Poor woman. When she does come in, Steinbeck uses the doorway brilliantly to introduce her. Both men glanced up, for the rectangle of sunshine in the doorway was cut off. A girl was standing there looking in. Wonderful. She cuts off the sunshine. That symbolises the way her appearance cuts off hope somehow, and foreshadows later events in the novel. It sets her up immediately as a character that is going to be a problem. The description of her is really fascinating. There's this kind of juxtaposition of elements that are quite girlish and childish, and other elements which are quite feminine, sexualized, and imply that she's a femme fatale, a dangerous woman. A girl was standing there looking in. She had full rouged lips and wide-spaced eyes, heavily made up. Her fingernails were red, her hair hung in little rolled clusters like sausages. She wore a cotton house dress and red mules, on the insteps of which were little bouquets of red ostrich feathers. "I'm looking for Curley," she said. Her voice had a nasal, brittle quality. So on the one hand, she's described first of all as a girl, and her hair in little rolled clusters like sausages. Sausages is child's food, isn't it? Little rolled clusters makes her sound like some kind of doll, and again links her with childishness. But on the other hand, she's sexualized, or she sexualizes herself in the way she dresses and makes herself up. Full rouged lips, Her fingernails were red mules, red ostrich feathers. She dresses herself in red. Red, obviously the colour of passion, the colour of flirtation, the colour of love, but also the colour of danger. So this idea of her being a femme fatale, a dangerously seductive woman. But her seductive dress is kind of ridiculous at the same time. I mean, red ostrich feathers. What? That's kind of too much, isn't it? So she's kind of girlish, but trying to be kind of sexual, and she hasn't quite got it right. There's something quite ridiculous about the way she looks. And finally, the word brittle describes not only her voice, but in fact her entire personality. She's fragile. She could break easily. So an interesting blend of characteristics. She doesn't manage to dress herself appropriately, and she certainly doesn't fit in, and she's pushed down by the men. There are animal-like qualities to her. She bridles when Lennie looks at her. Bridling suggests she's a bit like a horse. Twitched her body. Again, that suggests kind of her body being kind of very physical and animal-like. Her descriptions really link with this idea of these characters being like animals. When she leaves, we get more gossip about her. This time, George. Lennie says, gosh, she was pretty, but George calls her a bitch. George calls her jailbait. He calls her a rat trap. I mean, those are three horribly derogatory terms to use for a woman that he's only seen once. So her arrival on the scene is bookended by this negative gossip by Candy, and then this other negative evaluation by George. Poor woman. She hardly has any space to breathe in between these men looking down upon her and saying terribly nasty things about her. So these structural decisions by Steinbeck to structure the action and the dialogue in that way again show this really difficult role for her. Curley and his wife, they don't appear together. There's this kind of emotional and communicative disconnect between them. She's looking for him. The first thing she says is, I'm looking for Curley. Then Slim says, you ain't trying very hard. I've seen him going in your house. She was suddenly apprehensive. She's kind of looking for Curley, but she's also afraid of Curley. When Curley comes in for the second time, he's looking for her. Curley bounced in. You seen a girl around here? He demanded angrily. So they're looking for each other, but they never coincide. There's this kind of tension in the kind of running around and kind of trying to find each other, but they seem to be more suspicious of each other than anything else, don't they? Curley's wife, when she's by herself without her husband, she's quite flirtatious with the men. She's looking for their attention. Even with Slim, who doesn't appear, he calls her good looking, and she seems to like that. So there's this kind of this desire for positive male attention and this fear of her husband's attention. So it sets up their relationship as being quite complex right from the beginning. Now, the final major character to be introduced is Slim. Steinbeck saves the figure of strength until last. And when he comes in, the doorway is also mentioned, but he's very different in the way he is introduced to Curley's wife. She blocks out the sunlight, but he does not. A tall man stood in the doorway. He held a crushed Stetson hat under his arm while he combed his long black damp hair straight back. Like the others, he wore blue jeans and a short denim jacket. When he had finished combing his hair, he moved into the room, and he moved with a majesty only achieved by royalty and master craftsmen. He's a tall man, and that word tall implies not only physical but also moral stature. Immediately, he looks like one of these cowboy heroes that the ranch workers read about in their Western magazines, doesn't he? And he's also a manly man. He's a virile man. His long black damp hair, the dampness of his hair, the blackness of his hair implies his masculine strength as well. You know, his hair grows long. Long damp hair often in literature implies strength, often fertility as well. It's a sign of real manliness here. But he's like the others. He dresses the same as the others. That's very different from Curley, isn't it? Curley wants to make himself look different by the way he wears the boots, and the boss as well. But Slim looks the same as the others. He puts himself on a level with the other workers, and that's admirable to the reader as well. Then there start to be these images that compare him to royalty, majesty achieved by royalty. Indeed, if we read on, it describes him as a prince. He was a jerk-line skinner, the prince of the ranch, capable of driving 10, 16, even 20 mules with a single line to the leaders. He was capable of killing a fly on the wheeler's butt with a bullwhip without touching the mule. There was a gravity in his manner and a quiet so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. He's the prince of the ranch. Again, another image of royalty. It places him really at the top of the hierarchy. We talked in the themes video about the hierarchy on the ranch. You've got the boss and his son at the top, and then you've got the able-bodied workers. Well, really, Slim is at the top of the workers' hierarchy, and perhaps at the top of the hierarchy that the reader creates in his or her mind by virtue of the images that Steinbeck applies to him. He's described as royalty. He's also described as being incredibly skillful, isn't he? Master craftsman. He can launch his whip forwards and hit a tiny fly on one of the rumps of the mules and kill it without touching the mule. That's incredibly skilled. So there's majesty about him and there's craftsmanship, real skill about him as well, which perhaps contributes to the fact that he's considered so highly. But there's something else that makes him really well respected as well, isn't there? A quiet so profound that all talk stopped when he spoke. His authority was so great that his word was taken on any subject, be it politics or love. This was Slim, the jerk-line skinner. His hatchet face was ageless. He might have been 35 or 50. His ear heard more than was said to him, and his slow speech had overtones not of thought but of understanding beyond thought. His hands, large and lean, were as delicate in their action as those of a temple dancer. Words like a quiet so profound, an ageless face. His ear heard more than was said to him. There's something mystical. I always think of him as some kind of Buddha figure. This quietness, this stillness, the way he's ageless. He can go beyond thought to this kind of deeper understanding that is kind of spiritual and godlike. When he starts talking, though, he's not a distant figure, kind of superior in any way at all. He smoothed out his crushed hat, creased it in the middle and put it on. He looked kindly at the two in the bunkhouse. "Bright and a bitch outside," he said gently. "Can't hardly see nothing in here. You the new guys?" Slim sat down on a box across the table from George. Kindly, gently, he sat down. That symbolically shows his immediate attempt to create a bond between them. Look how different he is to Curley. And then when George says something nice about Lennie, Slim looked approvingly at George for having given the compliment. When he finds out that they're travelling together, look at his response and compare it with Curley's response and with the response of the boss. "You guys travel around together?" His tone was friendly. It invited confidence without demanding it. "Sure," said George. "We kind of look after each other. He ain't bright, hell of a good worker, though." Slim looked through George and beyond him. "Ain't many guys travel around together," he mused. "I don't know why. Maybe everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other." Now, how different is that to Curley? He's not suspicious of George and Lennie. He's just asking questions that invite confidence, and George responds by giving his confidence. George does not lie to Slim. He lied to the boss, didn't he? And he was very defensive with Curley. But with Slim, George immediately just tells the truth. "We kind of look after each other," he says. And then Slim makes this kind of philosophical comment, doesn't he? Maybe everybody in the whole damn world is scared of each other. He's not kind of judging George and Lennie, but trying to understand not only George and Lennie, but trying to understand the whole world they're living in. So he's immediately a profoundly likeable, wise, and authoritative man. And the reader warms to him immediately. When I read this introduction, every time I read this introduction, I think, phew, thank goodness for Slim. Thank goodness Slim is there. Somebody with some real values in this animalistic world. Somebody who's a real carer and a thinker. But then, after this brilliant introduction, this such a positive introduction, we then get something incredibly shocking, also connected to Slim. Slim has a dog. "She sang her pups last night," said Slim. "9 of them. I drowned 4 of them right off. She couldn't feed that many. Got 5 left, huh?" "Yeah, 5. I kept the biggest." What? Rewind a moment. Slim is a puppy drowner. He's just drowned 4 pups. But why did he do it? so that 5 others could survive. Now let's have a think about that. This is a Darwinian world, survival of the fittest. Now Slim kind of knows this, and he knows that the dog has had too many pups and not all of them will survive. So how's he going to give the best chance to most of them to survive? Well, he's going to get rid of the 4 smaller, weaker ones so that the mother will have enough milk to give the other ones. In other words, he's going to take a difficult moral decision. Now that's really important in this novel, and if you've read the whole novel, you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. His morality is to perform actions which will give the greatest good to the greatest number. And if you look up what kind of morality that is, you will discover that that's called utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. So he is a utilitarian, and he seems to believe through his actions in utilitarianism, the greatest good for the greatest number. That is an important philosophy that was current in the 20th century, and it's still important now. But it's not a kind of Christian philosophy of forgiveness or of letting God decide the course of events. It's a kind of active philosophy of taking decisions so that most people can have the best outcome, even if they're not easy decisions, even if they're moral dilemmas. So there's a complexity to his character, which you have to admit is also admirable, because he can take those difficult decisions. That's what it takes to be a hero in this environment. When he leaves, a brilliant exit. Remember how I said Steinbeck uses the door? He leaves in a very regal way. Carlson stepped back to let Slim precede him, and then the 2 of them went out the door. There you go. Carlson stepped back, showing deference to this leader among men. What a great figure Slim is. And again, they've come onto the stage, the bunkhouse, and they've left through the door. And that's it. You've had the introduction to all the major characters. There is one other character who's mentioned here. He's not a major character, but he does have an important role to play, and that's Carlson. Now, he's only on the stage for a couple of pages, but it's quite interesting how different he is to Slim in some ways and similar in other ways. So he has this kind of utilitarian morality to him that Slim does. Why don't we get Candy to shoot his old dog and give him one of the pups to raise up? I can smell that dog a mile away. Got no teeth, damn near blind. Candy feeds him milk. He can't chew nothing else. Carlson's also got this kind of utilitarian belief, let's kill off the old dog. It smells bad. It's nearly blind. It's not doing anyone any good. And then Candy can have a new dog. So there's a kind of morality in there. He realizes that Candy needs a dog with him. But it's much more brutal, isn't it? He hasn't asked Candy about the emotional impact of killing off his dog. And there's also something else that's not as friendly about him as Slim. He laughs about Lennie's surname. Lennie Small. He ain't very small. He chuckled softly at his joke. He ain't small at all, he repeated. That's not cruel to Lennie, but it's not exactly friendly towards him either. He refers to Lennie in the third person. He doesn't say anything directly to him. So I think Carlson is there to juxtapose Slim. He lives in this environment of Darwinian survival. He understands the values of utilitarianism, but he's not such a compassionate man. He doesn't talk to Candy about getting rid of his dog. He doesn't really talk to Lennie. He just laughs about a joke he made about Lennie. So yeah, there's a difference between Carlson and Slim, and they represent different ways of being a ranch worker. And that's it. End of chapter 2. All of the major characters have now been introduced. Except for one. That's Crooks, the African American. He doesn't get introduced till chapter 4. He's so low down the hierarchy that he has to wait till over half the novel before we even get to properly meet him. But we'll talk about him when the time comes. What a wonderful way Steinbeck has, don't you agree, of bringing people in the door, taking them out again, just like a stage. So dramatic. If you like this video, please do click that you like it, give it a thumbs up. That's not just a token of your appreciation for me, it actually helps my video to reach a wider audience, because YouTube will start sending it out to more people if it gets more likes. So please click like. And I'm going to carry on with this series. Next up will be chapter 3, my analysis of themes, and another video on my analysis of characters. So subscribe to my channel, get alerts, and you'll know when I've created my next video.